There is something happening in your hands and feet right now that your doctor has almost certainly never tested for. And if you are over 55, this matters more than almost anything else I could tell you today. I have spent decades working with patients in this age group, and the single most common pattern I see, the one that causes more suffering, more loss of independence, more quiet desperation than almost any other condition, is nerve damage that was completely preventable. Not because the science wasn't there. The science has been there for years, but because nobody checked, nobody ran the right test, nobody asked the right question. And by the time most people find out what's happening, the damage has been accumulating for a decade or more. If you have noticed any tingling in your fingers or the tips of your toes, if your feet sometimes feel like they are burning, especially at night, if you have had moments where your hands felt clumsy, where you dropped something you shouldn't have dropped, where your grip felt weaker than it used to, I need you to stay with me, because what I am about to share could be the most important health information you hear this year, and almost nobody is talking about it. I have seen this destroy people's quality of life for decades, and it didn't have to happen. Let me tell you something I have watched play out hundreds of times in clinical practice. A patient comes in, usually in their mid to late 60s. They have been noticing something strange for a while. At first it was just occasional, a little tingling in the feet before bed, a strange burning sensation that would come and go. They mentioned it to their doctor, who ran some standard blood work, said everything looked normal for their age, and moved on. So the patient moved on too. What else could they do? But here's what makes this situation so serious. And I'll come back to this point in just a moment, because it changes everything about how you should respond to what you're feeling right now. Peripheral nerves don't send the same kind of obvious warning signal that a heart problem or a kidney problem might send. They deteriorate quietly, gradually, in ways that feel like nothing more than the normal inconveniences of getting older. The tingling that started in your toes is now creeping toward your ankles. The burning that used to happen 2 or 3 nights a week is now happening every night. The sense of balance that used to be automatic now requires a conscious effort, and each step in that progression felt so subtle that it was easy to dismiss. This is not aging. This is a specific, identifiable process happening inside your nervous system. And the fact that most doctors never check for the one critical signal that reveals it early, that is the medical failure I want to talk about today. Think about what your days actually look like. You wake up in the morning, and before your feet even touch the floor, there is already that familiar burning. You have stopped sleeping in certain positions because the contact between your feet and the sheets causes a discomfort that is hard to even describe to someone who hasn't felt it, like heat and pressure and electricity all at once. You get up, and there is that first moment of instability, that second or two where you are not entirely sure your legs are going to hold you the way they should. You reach for something and your fingers don't quite close the way you intended. You put on your shoes and realize you couldn't feel whether you tied them tightly or loosely until you looked down and checked. These are not random inconveniences. These are your nervous system sending distress signals. And in my years working with patients over 60, I have seen what happens when those signals are ignored, or worse, when they are masked with medication without anyone ever identifying the underlying cause. You have probably already been through part of this. You may have been told that what you're experiencing is just a normal part of getting older. You may have been prescribed gabapentin or Lyrica, and maybe it dulled the sensation for a while, but you likely noticed something else. A kind of mental fogginess, a loss of sharpness, a feeling of being slightly disconnected from the world around you. And the relief, when it came, was never complete. The burning came back. The tingling came back. Because the medication was never treating the problem. It was covering a symptom while the real process continued underneath. This is one of the most important things I can share with you today. And this is where I need you to pay very close attention. The real story here begins with something most doctors never mention: the peripheral nervous system. These are the nerves outside your brain and spinal cord, the vast network of communication lines that run from your spine to your fingertips, from your spinal cord to the soles of your feet. There are hundreds of millions of them, and they are responsible for everything you feel, everything you sense, everything your body communicates to your brain about the physical world around you. Each of these nerves is wrapped in a protective coating called myelin. Think of myelin exactly the way you would think of the rubber insulation wrapped around an electrical wire. When that insulation is intact, the electrical signal travels cleanly, precisely, without interference. When the insulation begins to deteriorate, When it thins, when it breaks down, when it develops gaps, the signal starts to distort, it leaks, it misfires. And you experience that as tingling, as burning, as numbness, as the sensation of electric shocks moving through your feet for no apparent reason, as the inability to feel temperature properly, as the loss of fine motor control that makes buttoning a shirt feel like an exercise in frustration. This process, the deterioration of myelin, is the central mechanism behind what researchers call peripheral neuropathy. And here is what makes it so dangerous and so widely misunderstood. The myelin doesn't break down all at once. It breaks down gradually, over years, sometimes over decades. And in the early stages, the symptoms are subtle enough that most people, and most doctors, attribute them to something else. Tired feet, poor circulation, normal aging, the standard things you hear when the real explanation isn't being sought. But here's where the research gets really surprising. And this is the part that I believe every person over 55 should know. The single most critical factor in maintaining myelin integrity, the one nutrient that your peripheral nervous system cannot function without, is vitamin B12, specifically a form of B12 called methylcobalamin. And here is the problem. After the age of 60, the stomach's ability to produce a protein called intrinsic factor, which is required for B12 absorption, declines dramatically. This means that even if you are eating foods that contain B12, your body may be absorbing only a fraction of what it needs. And if you are among the millions of Americans over 60 taking metformin for blood sugar management, the situation is significantly worse. Metformin is now well documented to block B12 absorption even further. And yet most patients taking it are never told this and are almost never monitored for the resulting deficiency. Studies suggest that up to 40% of adults over 60 have B12 levels low enough to begin affecting nerve function. 40%? That is not a rare edge case. That is nearly half of the senior population walking around with a deficiency that directly contributes to the deterioration of the protective sheath around their nerves, while their doctors run standard blood work and say everything looks normal. I want to stop here for a moment and make something very clear. When I say looks normal, I mean normal by the conventional reference range, a range that many researchers now believe is far too low to reflect optimal nerve health. There is a meaningful difference between not clinically deficient and having enough B12 to actively maintain myelin. Most doctors never explain this distinction, and most patients never know to ask about it. But the myelin problem doesn't end with B12. This is where it gets more complex, and where the research increasingly points to a combination of factors that the conventional medical system rarely addresses together. I had a patient, I'll call him Gerald, 71 years old, retired engineer, came to me after 3 years of what he described as a slow unraveling. The burning in his feet had started mildly, around age 67. By the time I saw him, he was waking up 2 or 3 times a night. He had stopped his evening walks, something he had done every day for 30 years, because he no longer trusted his balance. He had fallen twice in his bathroom. His doctor had prescribed gabapentin, which made him feel, in his words, like he was thinking through wet concrete. He stopped taking it after 2 months, and the pain returned within a week. He was told there was nothing else to offer. What we found when we did a comprehensive assessment was a picture I have seen over and over. Severely depressed B12 levels, significant alpha-lipoic acid deficiency, low vitamin D, and elevated inflammatory markers that nobody had thought to connect to his nerve symptoms. He had been living with a set of nutritional gaps that were systematically starving his peripheral nervous system of everything it needed to maintain itself. And not one of those gaps had ever been identified, let alone addressed. This isn't an unusual story. This is the story of millions of Americans over 60. And I need you to understand the full weight of what that means, because this isn't just about tingling in your feet. This is about everything that tingling eventually costs you. The nerve damage that begins as an occasional burning sensation does not stay occasional. Left unaddressed, it progresses. The numbness that started at your toes moves up your feet, up your ankles, toward your calves. The loss of proprioception, your body's ability to know where it is in space without looking, becomes severe enough to make every uneven surface a potential fall. And falls in adults over 65 are not just inconvenient, they are the leading cause of accidental death in that age group. The hip fracture that follows a fall leads to hospitalization, surgery, rehabilitation, and in a significant percentage of cases, a permanent loss of the independence the person had before. This is the progression I've watched happen. And the devastating part is that it doesn't announce itself. Every stage feels like a small step, until suddenly the steps have added up to something that cannot be reversed. Think for a moment about the person you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the walks you want to still be taking, the grandchildren you want to be able to keep up with, to get down on the floor with, to catch when they run to you. The life you have built, the independence you have maintained, the sense of being fully yourself that depends so heavily on your physical capability. All of that is connected to what is happening in your nerves right now. And I say this not to frighten you. I say it because I have sat with too many patients who looked back and said, "I wish someone had told me sooner." The sleep that gets destroyed by nerve pain at night doesn't just leave you tired. It disrupts every system in your body. It accelerates cognitive decline. It deepens depression. It isolates people from the social world they need most, and the quiet withdrawal that follows. The stopping of the activities, the avoiding of situations where balance might be challenged, the growing reluctance to go anywhere unfamiliar. That withdrawal has a name. It is the erosion of a life. If what I'm sharing today is new to you, and I suspect it is, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I release critical health information for people over 60 every week. Information your doctor may not have time to share in a routine appointment. Hit the subscribe button below. It costs nothing. And it could be one of the most important health decisions you make today. Now, let me tell you about what the research increasingly points to as the nutritional foundation of peripheral nerve health. And this is the part that most people over 60 have never been told, because it doesn't fit neatly into a prescription pad. The first and most critical is methylcobalamin, the active form of vitamin B12, not cyanocobalamin, which is the cheap synthetic form found in most drugstore supplements and which your body must convert before it can be used, a conversion that becomes increasingly inefficient with age. Methylcobalamin is the form that crosses directly into nerve tissue. It is the form that participates directly in myelin synthesis. Researchers have studied it extensively for its role in nerve regeneration and nerve signal restoration. In my years working with patients, the improvement in symptom patterns I have seen associated with adequate methylcobalamin levels is consistent and remarkable. The research suggests that this single deficiency, left unaddressed, may be the most preventable cause of progressive nerve deterioration in the senior population. The second compound is alpha-lipoic acid, ALA. This is an antioxidant unlike most others because it is both fat-soluble and water-soluble, which means it can penetrate the interior of nerve cells in ways that standard antioxidants like vitamin C or vitamin E cannot. Inside the mitochondria of nerve cells, the energy-producing centers, oxidative stress accumulates over decades, and ALA is one of the very few compounds capable of neutralizing that damage from the inside. It has been one of the most researched natural compounds for peripheral nerve support over the past 3 decades, and yet most people over 60 have never heard of it. The third is acetyl L-carnitine. This is an amino acid compound that supports energy production inside nerve cells specifically. Think of it this way: a damaged nerve trying to repair itself has enormous energy requirements. Acetyl L-carnitine acts as a transport molecule, moving fatty acids into the mitochondria so they can be converted into cellular fuel. Without adequate levels of this compound, damaged nerves lack the metabolic resources to begin even the most basic repair processes. Clinical settings have studied it extensively for nerve health support, and the findings are consistent with what I have observed in practice. The fourth is benfotiamine, the fat-soluble form of vitamin B1. Standard thiamine, which is water-soluble, struggles to penetrate nerve tissue effectively. Benfotiamine, by contrast, crosses cell membranes easily, accumulates in nerve tissue, and has been studied for decades in European clinical settings for its specific role in protecting nerves from the kind of glucose-related damage that is so prevalent in people with diabetes or prediabetes. If your blood sugar has ever been elevated, even if you have not been given a formal diabetes diagnosis, this compound is directly relevant to your situation. And finally, magnesium. It is involved in over 300 biological processes in the human body, including the regulation of the calcium channels in nerve cell membranes that control how electrical signals are transmitted. Chronic magnesium deficiency, which studies suggest affects a majority of adults over 60, creates a state of nerve hyperexcitability. The nerves fire more easily, more frequently, more intensely than they should. This amplifies pain. It amplifies the burning sensation. It makes symptoms that might otherwise be manageable feel unbearable. And most people taking magnesium supplements are not taking the right form. Magnesium glycinate or malate penetrates nerve tissue far more effectively than the standard oxide form found in most supplements. Now, I want to address something directly because I know what you may be thinking. If these compounds are so well studied, why isn't your doctor recommending them? The research on this is clear, but it rarely reaches the people who need it most. This is not a conspiracy. It is a structural problem. The conventional medical system is organized around diagnosis and treatment, around identifying a problem and prescribing an intervention that has been through a specific regulatory pathway. Nutritional compounds, because they cannot be patented in the same way that pharmaceuticals can, have never attracted the kind of investment required to move them through that pathway. This means that even when the research is strong, and in some of these cases the research is very strong, it doesn't become standard clinical practice. Your doctor's training did not include it. The 10-minute appointment does not allow for it. And so millions of people over 60 continue to suffer from something that the published literature increasingly suggests is both identifiable and addressable. I put together a short presentation that goes much deeper into everything I've covered today. It includes specific approaches that I've seen work for patients in exactly this situation. The link is in the description below. Watch it when you have a quiet moment. I think it's going to answer a lot of questions you didn't even know you had. I want to leave you with something important. You are not powerless here. What you are experiencing is not simply the inevitable cost of getting older. The peripheral nervous system has a remarkable capacity to respond when it is given the specific support it has been lacking. The patients I have seen who commit to addressing these nutritional gaps, who provide their nervous system with the raw materials it needs, described changes that they had stopped believing were possible. Sleeping through the night, walking with confidence again, feeling the ground under their feet in a way that had been absent for years, being able to hold a cup, button a shirt, carry a grandchild without that background anxiety that something might go wrong. None of this is guaranteed. The body is not a simple machine. But the research and my own clinical experience point clearly in one direction, and that direction begins with understanding what your nervous system actually needs and why it has been going without it for so long. You came to this video because something is happening in your body and you are looking for a real answer. That is exactly the right instinct. You are not overreacting. You are not imagining it. And the information you just heard is something that most people your age will never learn because nobody ever thought to sit down and explain it to them. If today's video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone you care about because there are millions of people over 60 dealing with this silently, and they don't have to. The short presentation in the description goes even deeper. I highly recommend watching it when you have a quiet moment. Subscribe for more critical health information every week, and leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? I read every single one.